Since we're not going to have class tomorrow, I wanted to give you a short lesson that I would have delivered were we to have met on September 2nd. It's about symbolism and typology and gives us a way of thinking about the entire poem, Beowulf, all 3,200 lines of it. Here we go. Quick review. Literary analysis triangle. We've nicknamed him Gary. Gary, the literary analysis triangle. He has three corners: context, form, and theme. And the thing we've talked least about up to this point is theme. And so what we're going to do today is talk about two concepts that help us formulate the theme, which, remember, is an interpretation of a subject from ordinary life. So things like mortality, or perhaps heroism, perhaps paganism, these are subjects. What theme does is give you an interpretation of that subject from the author's point of view. First one, symbolism. Symbolism is repeated nouns. So when you see three monsters across an entire book, you might ask yourself, oh, here's an interesting reappearing noun. We've got Grendel, and then we've got Grendel's mother, and then we've got the dragon. And if we look more closely, we can see that each of these monsters represents a transgression of an Anglo-Saxon value. So Grendel is an awful house guest, the worst kind of guest. In fact, he's anti-community. What does he do when he comes? He makes it so nobody can hang out together in the party palace he arrived. What about Grendel's mother? She is anathema because she wants to take vengeance into her own hands, and for women in Anglo-Saxon society, that was a definite no-no. What about the dragon? The dragon is transgressive because he keeps all the gold that he is in charge of. So remember how Hrothgar or Hylak are called ring givers? Well, the dragon is the opposite of that. He's not generous. He is a miser. And with symbolism, we're able to say, oh, here's this reappearing thing that happens. Beowulf encounters three enemies. They're all monsters, and each of them represent a different kind of transgression of Anglo-Saxon culture. The other thing I think that would help you out with literary themes is typology, where we've got repeated verbs. So now what we're thinking about are not just nouns like monsters, but actions that keep coming up. So here's what I want you to think about. Notice that the very beginning of the poem, Shield Chieftain, the great grandfather of Hrothgar, the longest description of him is a description of his funeral. We don't get a long description of his victories. We get a description of what happens when he dies. And that same thing happens with Beowulf at the end of the poem. We get a long description of his funeral. And the poem ends not with a victorious shout, but with a whimper and a cry as the greatest warrior in the Geat army has died. And so we might think about what that says about the poem. And I think this can give us a really concrete way of identifying the poem's tone. It's elegiac, it's mournfully nostalgic. The poet ends not with a triumphant yell, but by saying, look, Beowulf put his trust in his body. He did great things with his body, but that body eventually failed. And now, with that body's failure, is this culture's failure. When Beowulf dies, his tribe will die too. You put your faith, your pride in your physical strength, you will eventually die. And that might be a really good way of you thinking about the themes of the poem you just finished.